The photos weren't sent to me. I wasn't tagged. I only found them because my coworker, Marla, who has a degree in nosiness, dropped her voice to a conspiratorial whisper and said, "Wow, your sister looks amazing in that wedding shoot." Then she turned her phone around. There she was, Vanessa, in my wedding dress, on the cliffs of Mendocino, at sunset, hair tousled by wind, eyes brimming with that brand of curated spontaneity only influencers or predators can truly master. Captioned, "A moment I'll never forget. A beginning worth stealing. I'm Rachel, 34, daughter of Helen and Mark, fiancé, no, then fiancé of Drew, and apparently, the last to know that I no longer owned the dress I worked 6 months to pay for. I remember setting down my coffee cup and staring. My hands didn't shake, my breath didn't hitch, but something in me unhooked. That precise moment when the last rivet on a ship's hull pops and it starts to take on water in silence. The call came 2 hours later. Mom. Sweet as syrup. Honey, don't be upset. Never a great opener. She said Vanessa needed options for her engagement photos. That she had so few dresses that fit the theme. That my dress was right there in the old house, hanging in the back of the closet, untouched, unloved, unused. We just needed it for the weekend. We? I asked. I already knew. There was a pause on the other end. Well, she would have asked you, but you always say yes anyway. That's the thing, isn't it? When you become the one who's always reasonable, always agreeable, the line between permission and expectation gets erased. You said you were going to wear a different dress anyway, Mom added lightly. I said I might, I corrected. She didn't hear it. Or didn't care. Besides, your sister looked incredible. She's really found her glow again, Rachel. I didn't reply. Not right away. I was too busy replaying one sentence in my head. A beginning worth stealing. Because she hadn't said borrowing. She hadn't said temporary. She hadn't tagged. She wasn't testing the dress. She was claiming it. I ended the call with something like, "Okay, thanks for letting me know," though even I couldn't recognize the voice that said it. It sounded like someone stepping backward into a fire, pretending it was warm. I texted Drew. "Did you know about the photo shoot?" He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and, "Yeah, I heard. She looked good, right?" Right. There's this odd moment when betrayal stops feeling like a knife and starts feeling like clarity. Like your entire life was a fogged mirror and someone finally wipes it clean. You don't scream, you don't fall, you take inventory. I opened my laptop, pulled up my planner, scrolled to September. Then I deleted the event. Final dress, fitting. My wedding wasn't off. But something else was. The spell. The story. The version of my life where I'm the girl who waits her turn and claps politely while her sister steals the spotlight. Again. Let's rewind, just briefly, for those unfamiliar with the hierarchy in our family. Vanessa is the star. Always has been. The miracle baby after 2 miscarriages. The blonde with the dimple that got her out of any trouble. She didn't walk through life. She floated. And I, older, quieter, darker-haired, was always the reasonable one. Rachel doesn't need as much, Mom once said during a fight about college funding. She's so self-sufficient. Funny how self-sufficiency sounds noble until it becomes an excuse to give you less of everything. I'd met Drew at a friend's engagement party 3 years ago. We hit it off, slow and sure. He was steady. No fireworks, no chaos. I liked that. I craved calm after years of standing next to Vanessa's hurricanes. He proposed last winter. A quiet dinner, a simple ring. I cried, not because I was overwhelmed, but because for the first time I felt chosen. The dress came next. Not Helen's. God, no. Her wedding gown was yellowed lace and martyrdom, and she'd already offered it to Vanessa twice. I wanted something new, something unshared. I found it on a rainy Tuesday at a boutique no one in my family had ever stepped foot in. Ivory silk, structured bodice, hand-stitched hem. I worked extra shifts to afford it, paid for it myself, hung it carefully in the guest room closet of my childhood home, knowing it was safest there, until now, or so I thought. I visited the house that weekend, under the pretense of dropping off a gift for Dad. The front door was unlocked, as always. I went upstairs, into the guest room. The closet door was open, my dress was back, but it wasn't the same. The hem had been dragged across gravel, faint stains kissing the edge. A thread had unraveled beneath the sleeve. Worst of all, the faint smell of sea salt and hairspray. I closed the closet door gently. Then I turned, scanning the room for anything else that might have been moved. That's when I saw the second shoe, a nude heel, Louboutin, size 6, Vanessa's. Kicked lazily beneath the bed. She hadn't just taken the dress. She'd treated the room like a dressing station, and no one had stopped her. "Maybe you can get it cleaned before your date," Mom said that night over dinner. "Or buy something else. The boutique's probably still open." She said it like she was solving a parking problem. Dad barely looked up from his paper. Vanessa arrived halfway through dessert. Fresh tan, glowing skin, wearing one of my old sweaters. "Oops," she laughed when I stared at it. "Guess I forgot this was yours." I watched her pour herself a glass of wine. Red. Near the white lace tablecloth. She always played with fire and let others clean up the scorch marks. "You know," she said, settling beside me with the casual entitlement of a cat curling into stolen sunlight. The dress looked amazing in golden hour. "You should definitely do photos at sunset." She smiled like it was a tip. Like I should thank her. "Do you remember?" I asked her, my voice flat. "When you crashed my senior prom? You wore my dress and showed up drunk to flirt with my date." Indy blinked. "That was forever ago." "You said it was just for fun." It was. "God, Rachel, why do you always hang on to things so tight?" She didn't wait for an answer. Didn't need one. And that's when I knew something else. Something that shifted everything. She didn't think she was hurting me. Because she didn't think I existed in a way that could be hurt. She'd spent a lifetime walking through my boundaries like they were missed. That night, I drove back to my apartment, unplugged my phone, and sat in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I opened my laptop and started a document titled Asset Reclamation, not Revenge. Not war. Just a simple, accurate label. I wrote down everything she'd ever taken, tangible or otherwise, and beside each item, I left a space. Not for what I would do, but for what she'd pay. Not in pain, in clarity, in correction. I was done being edited out of my own story. I was done being generous with thieves. The next day, I called Clara, my oldest friend, a woman who knew how to read silence like a symphony. I said, "I need a favor." She didn't ask why. She just said, "I'm in." Because that's the difference between sisters you're born with and sisters you choose. Vanessa once told me she didn't believe in consequences. "You either win," she said, "or you explain." She was wrong. Some of us wait. Some of us learn. Some of us write the ending. And it's not always a happy one. But it's always fair. You're probably watching this on your TV right now, just letting it roll while you relax. But if my story has you feeling something, don't just sit there. Pick up your phone, search LP, Family Drama on YouTube, and hit subscribe. Because sometimes the quietest way to say I understand is simply wanting to hear more stories like mine. Stories that don't always get told but always deserve to be heard. They didn't even bother to lie. That was the first thing I noticed. No performance of remorse, no rushed apology, not even the shallow kind you give out of habit. Just the lazy, casual assumption that I'd absorb it, like I always had. I found out she had ruined the dress the same way I found out she took it, secondhand. This time from a voicemail. Mom's voice, sticky sweet. "Hi, honey. Just a heads up. Vanessa nicked the hem a little on the rocks. You know how cliffs are. But don't worry, I have a seamstress friend who can patch it up, might even improve it." She ended the message with a cheerful little laugh. I didn't call back. That night, I sat alone on my balcony, watching the sky turn that heavy indigo between dusk and true night. I should have cried, should have screamed, but something in me had moved past reaction. I wasn't wounded. I was calculating. Drew was inside, cooking. He'd offered to make dinner, acting like everything was normal. I listened to the rhythm of his knife on the cutting board, the quiet clatter of a pan. He moved in my space with a kind of ease that no longer felt comforting. When he handed me a glass of wine, I noticed the label, the same vintage Vanessa had, gushed about over dinner last month. I stared at it, then took a slow sip. No comment. He leaned on the railing beside me. "Your mom said the dress can be fixed." I nodded. "She didn't mean any harm," he added. I tilted my head just slightly. "Who didn't?" he hesitated. "Both of them, I guess." So he'd known. About the shoot, about the damage, maybe even about the decision to use it. I waited to feel the hurt. It didn't come, just confirmation. Another column in the growing spreadsheet of betrayals, all labeled neatly now. I said, "Nothing." He tried again. "It's just a dress, Rach." That was the moment I knew. He wasn't trying to calm me. He was testing how far I'd bend. I turned to face him. "When we get married, and I walk down that aisle in whatever scraps she's left me, will you think of her too? Or will you pretend I'm your first choice?" He froze, just for a second, but I saw it. The stutter behind the eyes. The pause, before the lie. Then he said, "You're the one I asked." A clever response. Truthful, technically. But suddenly I understood why it was never "you're the one I love." I finished my wine. Cold, deliberate. He went back inside. And I went online. The boutique where I bought the dress didn't carry it anymore. The designer had moved on to a new collection. Of course, one of a kind. A moment worth stealing. I scrolled through the boutique's tagged photos, not looking for anything in particular. But then something caught my eye. A story highlight. From Vanessa's stylist. Titled, "Mendocino Magic." I clicked. Video footage. Vanessa twirling in the dress. The exact moment the hem ripped on the rocks. Her laughing as the stylist pinned it up with a plastic clip. Background voices cheering. Mom's voice loudest among them. "Don't worry. Rachel never minds sharing." The video had been posted 5 days ago. 5. That's how long they waited to tell me. 5 days of watching the footage circulate, collect likes, build momentum. It had already made it to a wedding inspo account with 200,000 followers. She wasn't borrowing the dress, she was branding it. The next morning, I stopped by my parents' house. Unannounced. I knew they'd be there. Sunday breakfast. Family ritual. Even after adulthood, some traditions cling like mildew. Vanessa opened the door, wearing my cardigan. Another thing I'd never missed. "Oh," she said, blinking. "Didn't know you were coming." "I didn't either," I said. "Where's Mom?" "In the kitchen, making her famous guilt pancakes." I stepped past her. The living room was filled with the sound of morning TV. Mark sat reading the paper, barely looking up. Mom looked up from the stovetop, spatula in hand, wearing that damn apron that said, "Blessed beyond measure." "Honey," she sang. "We were just talking about how we should do a double wedding someday. Can you imagine? You and Drew, Vanessa and Luke, same venue, double the love." I stared at her. "Do you know the hem is ripped?" She blinked. "Oh, You mean the dress? Yes, yes. We're having it taken in a bit anyway. Vanessa's slimmer in the hips. Should fall differently on you, but still wearable. Still wearable. They had already altered it. They didn't even ask. Vanessa behind me piped up. You're not actually mad, are you? I mean, you weren't going to wear that exact dress, were you? Mom said you were still looking. I turned to look at her. She smiled. That careless, glossy smile she'd perfected since childhood. The one that meant she'd already moved on from the consequences. Then I saw it, on the kitchen table, a folder labeled Vendor Estimates, September Wedding. She wasn't just borrowing the dress, she was planning her wedding in my month. In my venue, the cliffside estate Drew and I had toured last fall. She must have heard us talking about it. I'd shown her the brochure. She said she loved it. For you. I picked up the folder. Rachel, Mom warned. I opened it. First page. A photo of Vanessa and Luke, standing on the exact spot Drew and I had picked for our vows. I set the folder down. Carefully, precisely, as if it might explode, because inside, I had already exploded. But I smiled. The calmest I'd ever felt. I'll get out of your way, I said. Vanessa blinked. Wait, don't be like that. Like what? I asked. Like someone who just realized her family. Never expected her to fight back? Mom opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. I'm not canceling anything. I'm just done pretending this is normal. I walked to the door. Vanessa trailed me. You're overreacting. I stopped, looked her dead in the eye. You should be very careful with that phrase. It's the one thing that always comes before regret. Then I left. 3 hours later, I texted Drew. I need space. A few days. His reply came in under 60 seconds. Of course. Want me to call Vanessa? She might be able to smooth things over. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then I deleted the thread. That night, I pulled the dress out of the closet. Examined the tier. The altered seams. The stretch in the zipper. It wasn't ruined. It was remade for someone else. I didn't cry. I just reached for the scissors. Then, piece by piece, I began to dismantle what was left. Not out of rage, out of study, out of precision. Because before you destroy something, you have to understand exactly how it was built. And I was beginning to understand them all. My mother, my sister, my fiancé. They thought I was wounded, but I was just getting accurate. Let them have their borrowed moments. I was building something permanent. The call came at 10:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. She didn't even pretend it was urgent. Hey, Rach. So, Luke and I were just talking about maybe using succulents for the centerpieces, but you know how that doesn't really match the coastal theme. So now I'm wondering if we should lean more into rustic garden vibes instead. It took me a moment to place the voice, not because I didn't recognize it. Vanessa's voice was a frequency I'd been tuned to since birth, but because she spoke with the confidence of someone who hadn't just gutted me 2 days earlier. Said nothing. Hello? You still there? I stayed silent. She continued. Oh. Also, I was thinking about the dress. The seamstress says the hem can be fixed easy, and the bodice actually fits me better than I thought. Kinda meant to be, right? She laughed. And I finally spoke. You mean my dress? There was a pause. A beat. Just long enough to catch the shift in the air between us. Rachel, come on. You weren't even sure you wanted to wear it anymore. That sentence. That exact sentence. That was the tell. I wasn't sure. She didn't ask. And somehow, in that vacant space between those 2 points, she'd made herself the rightful owner. You know how many things I've passed down to you over the years? She added, her tone light, rehearsed. The green cardigan? That Calvin Klein clutch you loved in college? Sharing is kind of our thing. I felt something click, not in anger, in clarity. She thought she was being generous. Generous for giving me the illusion of a choice after the theft. You can keep it, I said. Silence. Then, wait, seriously? You've already marked it. Might as well finish the job. You're not mad? She asked, genuinely confused. And that's when I realized it. Vanessa didn't believe she had done anything wrong. Not truly. Because for her, the world rearranged itself to fit her desires. If she wanted something, that meant she was meant to have it. Any fallout was collateral, acceptable, forgotten. I ended the call. The next day, Drew brought home pastries, my favorite, allegedly. Apricot Danish, and a raspberry tart from the bakery downtown. He placed them on the kitchen counter with a small, guilty smile. I figured you could use a sweet start today. It was a gesture. Small, kind, too kind. He didn't mention the dress. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't even bring up Vanessa. Just handed me the tart like a peace offering and walked away. I stared at it for a long time before I noticed the receipt tucked under the box. 1 raspberry tart, 1 vanilla croissant, 1 almond latte. 3 items. I only ate 1. I pulled out my phone. Scrolled back through my messages. The ones from last week, from Vanessa. You should try the almond latte at Pine and Willow. Drew and I went after my shoot. It's addictive. My thumb hovered over the text. The timestamp matched the receipt, so they'd gone together, after the shoot, without telling me. I thought about the dress again. The laughter. The way Vanessa had said, kinda meant to be. It wasn't about the fabric. It never was. It was about possession. About replacing me piece by piece in a way so slow, so casual, it would pass unnoticed, unless you were watching. And I was watching now. At dinner that night, I asked Drew how his week had been. He told me he'd been stuck in meetings mostly. I stirred my soup, quietly. Did you stop by Pine and Willow again? He looked up. No. Why? I shook my head. Just curious. He changed the subject. Too fast. And in that instant, the air between us grew a second skin. After he went to bed, I stayed up. Not brooding, not grieving. Researching. I found the photographer who'd taken Vanessa's engagement shoot. She had a public gallery. I clicked through the images one by one. On the 7th photo, I saw the reflection. A window. Behind Vanessa, blurred slightly. But unmistakable. Drew. Standing beside the stylist, holding Vanessa's coat. Not just there. Involved. Not just unaware. Participating. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I printed the photo. Folded it into thirds. Slipped it into a book on our coffee table titled The Art of Partnership. Then I went to sleep beside him like nothing had changed, because outwardly nothing had. The next morning, I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. Rachel, sweetheart, you didn't sound good the other day. Vanessa said you sounded upset. I wanted to ask you something, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Of course. Why didn't you ever stop her? Silence. You knew she took my dress. You helped her. You watched her walk into my date nights, into my college interviews, into every room I stood in, and somehow convinced everyone it was hers first. Why didn't you stop her? She sighed. Rachel, it was never malicious. No, I said. It was worse. It was convenient. Don't do this, she warned. Don't turn this into a war. I'm not turning it into anything. I'm naming what already exists. She paused again. Then she said it. You've always been the strong one. You could handle it. I ended the call without another word, because I finally understood. They thought endurance was love, that if I could carry it, I should. That pain was the tax I paid for being reliable. That giving up space, silence, and dignity was my duty as the older one, the calm one, the strong one. But endurance isn't love. It's exploitation with better branding. That weekend, I drove to the coast, alone. I didn't tell Drew. I didn't need permission. I booked a room at the same inn where Vanessa's shoot had taken place. Room 204. Ocean facing. I knew because she'd tagged it in her photo captions. Sunset from heaven. That night, I stood on the balcony. Same view, same air, different woman. I pulled the photo of Drew from my pocket and burned it slowly in the ashtray, piece by piece. It didn't bring closure, but it brought intention. When I returned, Drew was waiting in the kitchen. "Where were you?" "Gone." He hesitated. "Everything okay?" "No," I said. "But it will be." He nodded, uncertain. And that's when I knew I had the upper hand, because Vanessa wasn't the only one who knew how to smile while building a guillotine. I was just quieter about it. For now. Clara didn't ask questions. When I showed up at her apartment unannounced with a bag over my shoulder and a file folder under my arm, she simply moved aside and let me in. The same way she had in college, when I'd shown up with a sprained wrist and a shattered voice after Vanessa, accidentally, exposed my diary to a room full of mutual friends. That's the thing about Clara. She remembers. She handed me a glass of cold water, didn't push, didn't prod, just waited. And when I finally laid the folder on her kitchen table, she sat across from me and opened it like she already knew it wouldn't be good. The first page held a printout of the venue. Confirmation email. Vanessa's wedding was booked at the St. Helena Estate Vineyard, the same venue Drew and I had been waitlisted for, the same venue he said we couldn't afford. "She booked it?" Clara asked. "She booked it 2 weeks before she spontaneously got engaged." Clara looked at me, then flipped to the second page. A map of the estate grounds. I had highlighted a spot in red. "The fountain," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "They're doing their vows in front of it. The planner's Instagram. Posted a layout mock-up last week. And it's run by a water pressure system on a basic timer valve. All underground. Pretty old tech. And the control box is right here." I tapped the red X. Clara didn't smile. Not yet. But her eyes sharpened, the way they always did when we were young and plotting against the RA who tried to sabotage our housing request. "I know someone who installs irrigation systems for luxury properties," she said after a beat. "He owes me a favor. I don't want anything dangerous," I said. "You want it poetic." "Yes." We sat in silence for a moment. Clara nodded. "I'll make a call." She made 3, actually. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, we had a blueprint. A pressure adjustment set to trigger a flare in the fountain. Not enough to hurt anyone, just enough to create chaos. Enough to turn a wedding into a wet spectacle. The right amount of spectacle. The kind people film. The kind that goes viral. Vanessa wanted to be unforgettable. I would give her that. That night Clara went to bed. I stayed up staring at the ceiling of her guest room, tracing the cracks in the plaster. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't giddy. I was hollow, focused, until I remembered something. A message. From months ago. One of the few moments Vanessa had pretended to be supportive during my engagement, I pulled out my phone and scrolled back. "Don't stress about Drew. He's a slow burn. You'll win him eventually." At the time, I had thought she was being flippant, rude even. But now, you'll win him eventually. Not he loves you. Not he's lucky to have you. Like it was still a game. I searched my old emails, found a calendar invite. Dated March of the previous year, dinner at Lorenzo's, 7 p.m. Drew, me, Vanessa. The night they'd met. I remembered how she'd laughed too loudly at his jokes, how he'd watched her cross the room like she was pulling the air with her. I remembered thinking, no, that's in your head. That's insecurity talking. It wasn't. I opened Drew's old laptop, the one he'd left synced to our cloud drive, the one he said he'd wipe later. He never did. There, tucked in an archived folder, was a zip file of photos, unlabeled, unsynced, hidden. I opened it. They weren't all explicit. Most were benign. Vanessa sitting on a bar stool. Vanessa laughing in the passenger seat of what looked like Drew's car. A blurry shot of the two of them in a mirror, his hand on her waist, her eyes locked with the camera. The dates were damning, all of them from the months before Drew proposed to me, and all of them deleted from his phone long ago, except they weren't gone, just archived, preserved, selected. I closed the laptop gently, like I was sealing a coffin. I didn't rage. I didn't call him. I didn't send the photos to my mother with a dramatic subject line. I printed 2 of them. One I slipped into a manila envelope, labeled it for later. The second I folded into a clean sheet of paper and wrote 4 words above it. You'll win. Him eventually. Then I drove to Vanessa's condo the next morning, slipped the note into her mailbox. No name, no signature. When I got back to Clara's, she was waiting with coffee. I talked to the irrigation guy, she said. And? We'll need 10 minutes on site, 2 tools, and an excuse to be at the venue before the wedding. She paused. You still want to do this? I want her to remember something for the rest of her life. Clara nodded. We'll need to get invited to the rehearsal dinner. That's when we scout. We'll be invited. You sure? Yes. Because I'd already checked Mom's group text thread. A new message had popped up that morning. Vanessa wants you both there for the rehearsal weekend. Sisters together, just like old times. I stared at the screen. Just like old times. Which part? The part where she convinced my prom date to ditch me? The part where she showed up at my graduation party in a white dress and gave an impromptu toast? The part where she told my ex-boyfriend that I was emotionally high maintenance because I asked for space, I typed a response. Wouldn't miss it. Then I turned to Clara. I need a new dress. You're not still planning your wedding, are you? No, I said. I need a suit. She raised an eyebrow. A suit? Yes, for the ceremony. Clara's voice dropped, low and precise. You're not talking about yours. I didn't answer. She smiled then. Just a little. Let me call a place. As she stepped away, I picked up the envelope again, ran my fingers across the edge. Clean. Sharp. I thought of Drew's hand on Vanessa's waist. Vanessa's text. My mother's voice, filled with delight over a dress that was no longer mine. They wanted me quiet. Reasonable. Tolerant. But they forgot what happens when you push silence too long. It doesn't scream. It plans. And I was done being the reasonable daughter. Was ready to become the reckoning. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Vineyard's private hall. Exposed brick, long oak tables, fairy lights strung above like the universe was pretending to be gentle. Vanessa made her entrance 40 minutes, late, wrapped in a silk ivory dress that looked suspiciously similar to the second gown I'd considered for myself months ago. She greeted every guest like royalty, hand on their arm, kiss on their cheek, voice just high enough to imply she cared more than she did. I arrived with Clara. She wore a black blazer, sleek and efficient, and blended in like she was there to audit the entire family. I didn't speak unless spoken to. It was safer that way. Invisible people don't start fires. They survive them. Vanessa floated toward us, Luke in tow. He looked harmless, clean-shaven, tall, polite in a way that felt manufactured, like a cover letter. He greeted me with a tight smile, and I studied. His face for cracks, signs he knew, signs he suspected. He didn't. He was just another in a long line of people who fell for her projection. Rachel. Vanessa beamed, clutching both my hands. I'm so glad you're here. It wouldn't be the same without you. Honestly, this weekend, it means everything. Her words were syrup, her eyes glass. But then, something happened. She squeezed my hands, firmly. Not like a hug, like a warning, or maybe a dare. I didn't flinch. She tilted her head, lips close to my ear. You're still wearing your hair up, right? I just want to make sure we don't both look too bridal. Then she smiled again, turned, and disappeared toward the bar. Clara said nothing, just took a sip of her drink and murmured, "She's baiting you." I know. You're not going to take it? I already did, just not the way she thinks. The evening unfolded as expected. To the untrained eye, it looked like a celebration. To me, it looked like chess. Helen toasted with a shaky glass of champagne, eyes wet with manufactured nostalgia. "My daughters," she said, voice catching. "Two brilliant, beautiful women. One day they'll both be brides. But tonight, Vanessa, you shine." The emphasis was subtle, intentional. I caught the way she didn't look at me. Like if she did, I might speak. Mark clapped politely. No speech, no acknowledgement. That was his way, support as silence. A man who mistook neutrality for fairness. The courses arrived, lamb, asparagus, buttered carrots. I watched Drew from across the table, seated between Vanessa and the maid of honor, an old college friend with a sharp laugh and fake empathy. He didn't look at me once. I wasn't surprised, because the envelope I left on his nightstand that morning contained the photos. One of him and Vanessa in his car. One of them at the cliff before he proposed to me. I hadn't written a note. I didn't need to. If he'd had anything to say, he would have said it by now. Instead, he ate his lamb, drank his wine, and stared at the woman beside him like nothing had happened. There it was. Then confirmation. He had chosen his silence over my truth, and in doing so had given me permission. When dessert was served, lemon tart, Vanessa's favorite, Clara excused herself and disappeared into the hallway. She was there to meet someone. The irrigation tech, a man named Joel, young, efficient, bribed with enough cash to overlook ethics for 20 minutes. She returned 15 minutes later. I asked nothing. She said nothing. But she nodded once. Barely. Done. The fountain was ready. Later, when the guests moved into the courtyard for cigars and coffee, I lingered near the edge of the terrace. The air smelled of eucalyptus and overwatered roses. Vanessa came to stand beside me, sipping her drink like she hadn't orchestrated the destruction of my engagement, my dress, and my presence. "I hope you stay after the ceremony," she said. "It'll be nice. Everyone's going to want pictures." I turned my head slightly. "You still think this is a game?" she smiled. "You always take things so seriously. It's exhausting." "I know," she sipped. "Still, you look good. Better than I expected." There it was again, the backhand dressed in silk, her default weapon. "Thank you," I said, and then, just to push, I added, "Drew used to say that when he was sleeping with me. Before you." She froze, smile intact, eyes blank, but her hand jerked slightly, wine sloshing against the rim. "You're lying," she said too softly. "Am I?" She didn't reply. I walked away. Later that night, as we were leaving, Clara touched my arm. "We need to talk," she said. Back in her car, parked under the trees, she pulled out her phone and played a recording. I listened. Joel's voice, nervous. "You sure this isn't going to ruin the pump system?" Clara's voice. "No, it'll recover. It's built to handle higher pressure. You're just spiking it for 8 seconds. She'll be fine." Then silence. Until she'll scream. Clara looked at me. "I recorded it in case we needed insurance. Smart." "I also heard something else," she said. "Joel's worked the estate before. He knows their maintenance guy. Apparently, Vanessa's team requested the same floral arch you and Drew originally booked. The exact one." I felt nothing, because that had always been the endgame. She hadn't just wanted a wedding. She wanted mine. What she didn't know What none of them knew was that I wasn't trying to stop her anymore. I was letting her walk directly into it. There's something satisfying about letting people build their own stage, decorate it with lies, and rehearse their own downfall, especially when all you have to do is cue the curtain. The morning of Vanessa's wedding was soft and gold, the kind of deceptive light that makes you believe nothing cruel can happen beneath it. The estate was humming, staff wheeling in crates of flowers, photographers moving like panthers with cameras, caterers arranging canapes like war formations. It was all carefully timed choreography. Beautiful, fragile. I arrived precisely on time, not early enough to be helpful, not late enough to be accused. Vanessa's bridal suite was on the second floor. As I entered, the smell of gardenias was thick and artificial. She stood near the mirror, back to me, already zipped into my dress. Not just a copy, not a replica. My dress. The one I had bought, altered, loved, hidden. She had made it her own, with new pearls along the neckline, a tighter fit through the waist, and layers of silk added like a lie trying too hard. I didn't flinch. "Look who decided to show up," she said, still facing the mirror. "I promised I would," I replied. Helen turned from the table, mascara wand poised midair. "Oh, thank God. We were starting to think you'd changed your mind. Help me with her lashes?" "I think she's fine," I said, folding my hands. Vanessa turned then. She looked radiant, deliberate, like a woman who had rewritten history and believed it. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "Last night, Luke and I were talking about how special it is to have you here. I mean it. I know things got weird. But today, I really just want us to be sisters." She held out her hand. For a second, I almost saw the version of her I used to love. The one I trusted. The girl who slept beside me in bunk beds and cried when I had my first heartbreak. But that version was gone. If she ever existed. So I took her hand, not to accept, but to disarm. "You look beautiful," I said, and let it hang there like a verdict. She smiled, satisfied, as if she'd won. Behind her, through the tall windows, I saw the fountain, still, calm, not yet aware of its purpose. Clara texted once, "Position ready. Ceremony in 20? I didn't respond. Downstairs, guests began to gather. Rows of white chairs faced the archway of flowers. The fountain gleamed behind it, a centerpiece. Innocent. I took my place near the front, far left. Clara stood across from me, near the eastern pillar, sunglasses on, holding a white parasol she didn't need. It wasn't for shade. It was timing. Music swelled. The aisle procession began. Bridesmaids first, each a clone in blush silk. Then Luke, standing tall. Expression, blank but resolute. Then the pause. Then Vanessa. Helen and Mark flanked her, each beaming. I watched my father's face carefully. His hand shook slightly as he handed her off. He met my eyes, then looked away. I didn't blame him. Not yet. Vanessa stood beneath the arch, framed by light, the hem of the stolen dress just brushing the marble lip of the fountain. The officiant welcomed us, his voice sweetened by a microphone, saying the usual things. Commitment, trust, love. When it was time for personal vows, Luke went first. His speech was safe, polished. It told us nothing about him except that he knew how to behave in a crowd. Then Vanessa began. "Luke," she said, voice trembling in a way I knew was practiced. "From the moment we met, I knew you saw me. Not as someone's sister, not as someone to compare, but as me. You gave me the kind of love that doesn't need to be earned, just accepted." She looked at me as she said it. For less than a second. But she did. My fingers tightened around the program. I've always known how to get what I want, she continued. But with you, I didn't have to chase it. You were already there. Clara lowered the parasol by 2 inches. Vanessa looked at her groom. I promise to walk beside you to build a life with you. No secrets, no shadows. Just light. Clara folded the parasol. Completely. The officiant raised his hand. Then, with the power vested in me, there was a low rumble, not thunder, pressure. I had timed it. I knew the exact moment, 8 seconds, enough to build, not explode, just rise. Water surged behind them, shooting upward like a blessing gone wrong. The fountain arched, then cracked into chaos. Not a drizzle, not a spray, a deluge. Vanessa shrieked as the cold hit her, full force, soaking her gown, her veil ripped sideways by the wind. Guests gasped, chairs shifted, phones flew into the air, capturing it all. Luke swore and ducked. The officiant stepped back, shielding the microphone. But I stayed still. I stayed dry, because I knew where to stand. I watched as Vanessa's perfect day twisted around her ankles in wet silk and mud. Her hair clung to her face. Pearls from the altered neckline dropped like teeth from an unraveling lie. She turned slowly, searching, not for help, but for someone to blame. Her eyes locked on me. You, she mouthed. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just looked. Helen rushed up with towels. Staff scrambled with umbrellas. The music, still playing, tried to carry the mood like a corpse through a parade. Mark stood up. He didn't move toward Vanessa. He moved toward me. But I stepped aside, slipped between chairs, and disappeared into the estate. Inside, near the coat check, I waited. And eventually, Clara joined me. Well, she said. She wanted unforgettable, I replied. You don't feel guilty? I looked down at my hands, dry, steady, still holding the ceremony. Program, no, I said. Because she didn't just take a dress. She took the story. Clara nodded. You've started a new one now. Outside, the chaos continued. But inside, there was calm. Because the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who lives for attention is give them exactly what they asked for, on your terms, at your time. With you holding the silence, they'll never be able to rewrite. The wedding was set in a sprawling vineyard estate in Napa, a place Vanessa had chosen for its opulence and exclusivity. The venue was adorned with cascading white roses, crystal chandeliers hanging from ancient oak trees, and a string quartet playing softly in the background. Guests, dressed in their finest, sipped champagne and murmured compliments about the picturesque setting. To them, it was a fairy tale. To me, it was the final act of a long-standing charade. I arrived alone, dressed in a tailored black suit that contrasted sharply with the pastel hues around me. My presence turned heads, not because of my attire, but because of the unspoken tension that followed me. I could feel the weight of their gazes, their whispered speculations. But I was beyond caring. I had come not to celebrate, but to observe. Vanessa, radiant in a designer gown, floated through the crowd, her laughter ringing out like a bell. She was in her element, basking in the adoration that had always come so effortlessly to her. Drew stood beside her, his arm around her waist, his smile practiced and hollow. They looked every bit the perfect couple, a carefully curated image for the world to see. Helen approached me, her expression a mix of surprise and disapproval. "Rachel," she said, her voice tight, "I didn't expect you to come." I met her gaze, evenly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." She hesitated, then nodded curtly before moving on. Mark, standing a few feet away, gave me a small nod, his eyes betraying a flicker of something. Regret, perhaps, or understanding. As the ceremony began, I took my seat at the back, away from the prying eyes and forced smiles. The officiant's voice droned on, reciting vows that felt more like lines from a script than heartfelt promises. I watched as Vanessa and Drew exchanged rings, their eyes locked in a gaze that was more performative than passionate. Then, as they were pronounced husband and wife, a sudden gust of wind swept through the vineyard, knocking over a floral arrangement and sending petals scattering. A collective gasp rose from the guests, followed by nervous laughter. Vanessa's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, raising her arms in triumph. It was during the reception that the facade began to crack. Clara, my ever-loyal friend, had managed to secure a spot among the catering staff. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her eyes scanning for the opportune moment. When she reached me, she slipped a small envelope into my hand, her expression unreadable. Inside was a USB drive. I knew its contents without needing to see them. Evidence of Vanessa and Drew's betrayal, captured in candid photos and incriminating messages. Proof that their relationship had begun long before my engagement had ended. I made my way to the DJ booth, where Clara had already coordinated with the technician. As the music paused, a hush fell over the crowd. The projector screen lit up, displaying a slideshow of Vanessa and Drew's secret moments, intimate dinners, stolen kisses, and messages that left little to the imagination. Gasps echoed through the venue, followed by murmurs of shock and disbelief. Vanessa's face turned pale, her eyes wide with horror. Drew stood frozen, his mouth agape. Helen rushed forward, attempting to shield her daughter from the onslaught, while Mark remained rooted to his spot, his expression stoic. I stepped forward, my voice calm and clear. I thought it was time everyone saw the truth. Vanessa turned to me, her voice trembling. You planned this? You ruined my wedding. I met her gaze, unflinching. No, Vanessa. You did that all on your own. The guests began to disperse, their excitement replaced by discomfort. The once celebratory atmosphere had turned cold, the illusion shattered. Helen, still clutching Vanessa, glared at me with a mix of fury and disbelief. Mark approached me, his voice low. I'm sorry, Rachel. I should have seen it sooner. I nodded, the weight of years of neglect and favoritism pressing down on me. It's too late for apologies, Dad. As I turned to leave, Clara joined me, her presence a steadying force. We walked away from the chaos, the sounds of the disrupted celebration fading behind us. The night air was cool, a stark contrast to the heat of the day's revelations. In the distance, the vineyard lights twinkled, casting a soft glow over the rows of grapevines. It was a beautiful place, tainted by the ugliness of deceit. But as I looked ahead, I felt a sense of liberation. The truth was out, the masks removed. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. The path forward was uncertain, but it was mine to choose. No longer bound by the expectations and manipulations of others, I could finally begin to heal. And as I walked into the night, I knew that this was not an end, but a beginning. The silence after the wreckage wasn't comforting. It was clinical, surgical. The fallout from Vanessa's wedding had spread fast, like gasoline tracing its own spark. Photos, whispers, screenshots. Not just of Drew and Vanessa, but of Helen's quietly maneuvered cover-ups, the emails she forwarded to herself, the messages she deleted from my phone while pretending to check the time. It had all surfaced. I didn't need to touch the match anymore. The fire was already consuming everything behind me. I spent the next week in Clara's apartment downtown. She barely spoke the first few nights. Neither did I. We were two women sharpening knives in the dark, each breath a calculation. The revenge had landed. But revenge is not justice. Not yet. Vanessa went radio silent, but I knew she was bleeding behind that perfect Instagram filter. Her honeymoon was now a PR scramble. She posted vintage wine and lavender fields. But the likes dwindled. Comments got locked. Her hashtags read like desperate pleas. Fresh start, love wins, healing vibes only. I read each one like a confession. A quiet scream behind every curated post. Then Helen called. Her name flashed on my screen at 6:14 a.m. That alone told me everything. She didn't call unless something was spiraling. I stared at the phone until it stopped. She called again, and again. The fourth time, I picked up. "You win," she said. "No hello." Just that. I leaned back against the couch, let the silence hum. "I wasn't playing a game." Her voice cracked. "You humiliated your sister in front of the entire community. Your father stood there and did nothing." Like always, she paused. "He's not well, Rachel." I waited. Blood pressure. Stress. This isn't good for him. There it was, the real reason. Not remorse, not fairness, but control, cloaked in concern. "Then maybe stop protecting the wrong daughter," I said before hanging up. That afternoon, I went to the old family house, not to visit, not to explain. I walked through the front door with an envelope. Clara followed, quietly recording from her phone in her purse. Evidence, just in case. Helen sat in the kitchen like a queen whose castle had burned. Makeup done, coffee untouched, a mask with cracks. Mark was there too, unusually still. Something in his eyes had changed, an absence, or maybe a presence that had taken too long to arrive. "I'm here to collect what's mine," I said simply, placing the envelope on the table. Wedding deposits, gifts sent to my name, my grandmother's locket, which Vanessa borrowed. And one more thing. Vanessa stepped in before I could finish. She looked thinner, not in the glamorous, envy-inviting way. Hollow, like a structure whose pillars had collapsed internally. "What more could you possibly want?" she spat, voice brittle. "You already poisoned everything." I walked toward her, calm. "I want my last word, something you stole every year of my life." She laughed, bitter. "I was the one who had to shine. You never even tried." That landed deeper than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it almost could have been, if I hadn't learned to survive through silence. Because I knew you'd all rather watch me disappear than watch me win, I said. So I waited, and now I choose when I speak. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a folded photo, an old one. Me and Vanessa as kids. She held the front of the bike. I was behind her, helmetless. You could barely see me. That photo had always sat in the hallway, framed. Everyone thought it was cute, until I realized she never let me take the front. Place the photo next to the envelope. Helen finally spoke. "Is this what you wanted? For us to fall apart?" "No," I said. "I wanted you to see that I was never the quiet one. I was the only one listening." Then Mark cleared his throat. We all turned. "I have something to say," he said. The room froze. He looked at Vanessa, then Helen. Then finally at me. "Rachel's right. We failed her, all of us, and I'm done pretending otherwise." Helen's face contorted. "Mark, no." His voice was low but final. "You protected the wrong things, the wrong people, and I watched because I was too tired to fight. But not anymore." Vanessa's lip trembled. "So, you're choosing her now?" "No," Mark said. "I'm choosing truth." I didn't cry. I didn't need to, because the twist wasn't in what he said. It was that I had never waited for him to say it. I was already gone. I had been for months. Clara looked at me, and we both knew. It was done. This house, this theater, this cast, they had finally run out of script. As we left, Vanessa called out, "You think they'll love you now? You think you won?" I turned slowly. No, I just stopped needing it. Outside, the air was dry and gold. Fall was starting to bite. I walked into it without looking back. The boutique smelled like linen, champagne, and quiet vengeance. Not the loud, explosive kind, but the quiet aftermath of someone who has already buried the past and picked her next dress. I stood in front of the mirror, the saleswoman behind me pinning the lapels of the ivory suit. Sharp shoulders, wide-leg trousers, silk blouse beneath. No lace, no veil, just precision and poise. Clara stood to the side, holding my phone, recording a few angles. "You sure you want to do it this way?" I nodded. "I'm not trying to prove anything anymore. I'm closing the loop." The wedding would be at a greenhouse in Marennes, mine alone. No guests, just Clara, a camera, a violinist, and a one-way aisle. No groom, no drama, no chance for someone else to hijack the story. We didn't announce it. We just made art of it. The video went live that evening. A slow pan across eucalyptus leaves, then me, walking alone down the aisle. Not fragile, not broken, but razor-sharp and grounded. The caption read, "Some vows are to yourself. Some rings are freedom. And sometimes you choose you." Within 48 hours, it had 1.2 million views. Comments poured in. "I've never seen power like this." She didn't reclaim the wedding. She rewrote what it even means. This made me cry in a way I didn't expect. And just below those, one comment from an account I almost skipped over. "I always thought she was quiet. Turns out she was just listening. Dad." I stared at that one for a while. No reply. I didn't need to. 3 weeks later, I got a letter from my grandmother's best friend, someone I barely remembered. Her handwriting was delicate, lined in navy ink. "Rachel, I found this in Sylvia's box of keepsakes. She always said it belonged to the strong one. I wasn't sure what she meant until I saw your wedding video. Inside was a key." I recognized the leather tag. My grandmother's lockbox, the one Helen claimed had been lost in a move 10 years ago. I dug it out from storage, hands trembling as I turned the key. Inside, an old letter. A black and white photo of my mother and Vanessa at one of those toddler pageants. But behind it, a picture of me, in overalls, standing with a science fair trophy. A post-it on the back said, "Don't let them erase her." That night, I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table, wine in hand, and breathed. For once, it wasn't about rage or grief. It was something else entirely. Liberation. I didn't need a family to validate my story. I didn't need a man to complete it. And I definitely didn't need forgiveness from the people who taught me silence was survival. Instead, I crafted the ending myself, stitched from all the threads they tried to pull loose. This wasn't a comeback. It was a rewrite. Now, to those watching, maybe you've been the quiet one in the room too. The peacekeeper. The one who swallows everything so no one else chokes on the truth. Maybe your pain has been dressed up as maturity, your absence mistaken for agreement. Let me tell you something. There is nothing noble about disappearing in your own story. Sometimes silence is wisdom. Other times it's just fear with makeup on. But when the time comes, when you've gathered every scar, every secret, every subtle betrayal into a blade sharp enough to slice through legacy, don't flinch, because there is no applause louder than choosing yourself, with no one left to clap. And if you're watching this wondering if you should speak up, act, walk out, or start again, do it. And this time, do it like it's your name on the banner. Not your sister's, not your parents', yours. Thank you for following my story. If it reached something inside you, if you saw yourself in the quiet, the cold, or the comeback, subscribe to this channel. Help us keep sharing the kind of stories that remind us silence isn't golden. Truth is, we'll see you in the next one. Rachel.